because, well, sadly, America as a country could potentially be in some trouble, could be brewing on the horizon. This is not according to me. This is according to the former president. But you know how people always sound sort of kind of doom and gloom, despair? Sometimes they might be apocalyptic in scope and nature. The world's coming to an end. You've heard those types of folks before on the internet, right? Primarily on the internet. Because they don't do that outside. They know no one would want to hear it outside. So it's primarily a means of trolling or annoying us on the internet. The doom and gloom and the naysayers. Oh, there's going to be a market crash. You all know these people. You watch them on YouTube. Anyway, we're familiar with that type of antics. But generally, former presidents don't partake in that type of conduct or rhetoric. It's generally for speculators, market analysts, conservative and liberal commentators, news publishers, academics, citizens. It's usually for those people to partake in those types of prognostications. Former presidents behave in a more dignified way. But, well, as is the case with our previous former president, he seems to be entertaining a very dark and insidious prognostication. He recently warned Americans of death and destruction if he's indicted on possible criminal conduct and behavior. Now, some will say, is it a warning or is it a threat? Well, as always is the case with someone like the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago, it's a good idea to hedge it, where you can say, oh, my adversaries perceive it as a threat, whereas people who are prone to believe my bullshit will see it as a warning. So it's a bit of a hedge. Let's say it is a warning. It's still a warning predicated on something bad happening to him and then the country being a product or a victim of a bad circumstance on him individually. So it's kind of at the very minimum, at least, wishing ill on you all as Americans because of his problems his woes, his hardships. Whatever happened to the most basic principle that your problems aren't my problems? Hey, because you got up late for work, you don't have a right to almost kill me as I'm crossing the sidewalk because you want to blow the red light. Your problem doesn't mold and meld into my issue. So at the very least, all Americans, regardless of political affiliation, should be upset with the notion that because his problem could be that he's potentially found to have been acting in criminal conduct, that death and destruction lies in our future. That's problematic, to say the least. That a supposed leader would want death and destruction for their own citizenry? Do you all know how crazy this is? We expect folks like his buddy and pen pal Kim Jong-un to say death and destruction to America. Sign North Korea. We expect that type of behavior. But generally, your own leader doesn't typically espouse glee almost that there's going to be death and destruction for their own citizenry. Let me know. I don't even remember dictators like Mussolini and Hitler wishing death on their own citizens. They were just trying to eradicate people who they didn't deem as human beings. So forget citizenship rights. But now we've gone to, oh, well, all of Americans are going to have to pay. It doesn't sound like a leader. It sounds like a nutty king. An insane lunatic. I don't know. Tell me what you all think. Death and destruction. And then you all, please, are we going to really sit here and pretend as though some in the media, I saw reports about this, some in the media are saying, oh, this is beyond the pale. Does the pale even exist at this point anymore? So, a reporter asked Congress member Jim Jordan, I think he has some type of ranking position on the oversight committee. They asked him concerning this recent death and destruction commentary from their former party president and presumptive frontrunner this time around. They asked him, have you seen or heard of this recent rant on his fledgling platform? And he said, well, no, I hadn't. had time to see it and read it. And I said, well, that's ironic, because they've had time to accuse the DA in Manhattan of committing some type of crimes for simply investigating. They've had time to fire off letters demanding that members of the office testify. But this in connection to that, and you haven't read it or seen it? Well, this is embarrassing to the whole entire Republican Party. And I think at this point he's realized that he's going to take down the party with him. You all, who can come out and defend it? It's indefensible. If Jim Jordan says it's no big deal, death and destruction in America if I'm indicted, that commentary is not a big deal. Then his opponent next year is going to say, you want death and destruction in Ohio 9? What congressional district wants death and destruction in their district? Courtesy of something potentially criminal occurring to one individual in the country of 330 million. Which individual Congress member is going to say, yes, death and destruction in my district, woo-hoo, I can't wait. So he's making a mockery of the entire Republican Party at this point. He realizes that his campaign is over with at this point. And now he's going to try to take down the Republican Party. And perhaps in his final act, try to take down the country. You know, that's what January 6th was really all about. They're trying to play it off. It's no biggie. Well, just like it used to not be a big deal, the State of the Union, before former President Obama was rudely interrupted. And now you see an escalation this year in interruptions, outbursts, abhorrent behavior. Do you really think that January 6th is going to happen in a vacuum? I tell you this, if the same party wins, then on the next inauguration, there might not be too much internal turmoil. But if a different party wins, you can forget the concept of ever having peaceful transfer of power again. You cannot put that genie back in the bottle, and they know it. Not without severe ramifications for those who perpetrated it and their mastermind, the orchestrator, themselves. Because now anyone, you all, feels justified to do it. Who doesn't? We saw people do it over an election. And I said this in another video. Could you imagine Congress members like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene defending civil rights activists in the 60s who potentially could have done the same thing. You could have had people like John Lewis decide to storm the Capitol building. There were a lot of young African Americans who were upset about their treatment in this country. And yet, you didn't have it. You had largely non-violent mass demonstrations and protests about basic fundamental human rights. But this over an election, and you storm the Capitol. You desecrate the halls. No, you all. No. So, we've seen the destruction. Our nation's Capitol building. You know, one of the places that your commander-in-chief, your leader, is sworn to protect. Talk about the weaponization of the executive branch on the legislative branch. The chief executive officer of the country under the Republican Party ordered a mob to attack the legislative branch. If that were a Democrat president, they would be making that claim to the American people nonstop. But because we have dishonest people who don't want to lose their income, translation, their job, they've defended a lunatic to now to the point where he's only talking with the most deranged individuals in our society. I want you all to think about this because it's serious. Death and destruction on America if he's indicted. Now, do you think that anyone outside of a narrow, dwindling cult of crazy lunatics like him will ever be enough to make him president in this country again? If you say yes, you don't even understand basic mathematics. Absolutely not. Because we already know 13% of his voters in 2020 have tuned out and turned off Fox News completely. Now that's 13% of 75 million who supposedly, and I would add ignorantly, supported his re-election campaign. Now you do the math. 13% subtraction of 75 million. And there's probably even more at this point. Because even if you're a supporter, you're like, who is the death and destruction coming to? Because they're thinking in the back of their mind, we already lost more than 1 million citizens to coronavirus. And much of that due to his irresponsibility, lack of accountability, botched decisions. Much of it. I know he'll say Dr. Fauci. But you know who hired Dr. Fauci? There's a long string of many of his appointees that he hired after their term or whilst they were there, being tarred, tarnished, and feathered by him. So you're telling me the stable genius hired so many people that were dumb as rocks, as he called many members of his former cabinet? Come now. 1 million Americans died of COVID. And that's just what they report. You all know they don't report numbers accurately. No governments do that. Can you imagine more death and destruction? Because we already had it under his watch. Heather Heyer and Ashley Babbitt. Let's talk about it. Heather Heyer was attending a counter demonstration protest put on by Black Lives Matter in favor of removing a Confederate Robert E. Lee statue from the public square in Charlottesville, Virginia. She was there along with thousands of counter-protesters and pro-white supremacist Nazis and all types of other despicable groups and people. Now, on the day that Heather Heyer, the morning to be exact, that Heather Heyer was murdered, there was violence, mass violence, that they don't want to show the citizenry, and that many of the citizenry has never seen before, the footage. You know, they want to say the footage of January 6th, meek and timid individual tourists. Show the footage of Charlottesville the night before Heather Heyer was brutally murdered by Alex Fields Jr. Show the footage of the Tiki Torch boys swinging their torches. You know, that night there were a small group of black reverends and parishioners of many different religious denominations. And they were chanting and singing songs. And some of the racists came over and they were ready to kill, in Dr. Cornel West's words, not mine, his words. He said they were going to kill them if Antifa didn't step in with their bats and other objects that they carry and defend these reverends. Dr. Cornel West said he would have been killed that night, murdered by them. The folks who were chanting, "Jews shall not replace us," those folks, they came looking for blood, like vampires. Ooh. And the next morning, Alex Fields Jr. got his thirst, like a vampire, brutally murdering Heather Heyer. Rest in peace, Heather. We're never going to forget Heather. We're just not. We're never. And do you think that the leader at that time reached out to Heather Heyer's parents? Do you think that occurred? I can most assuredly tell you it did not. Alex Fields Jr. was in the service of the United States military, one of its branches. And this is an individual who murdered, knowingly, an American citizen, counter-protesting, and tried to murder scores of others. Many people were injured severely. It was like a war scene. He took a vehicle and rammed it full speed into the counter Black Lives Matter protesters. Yes, we'll never forget. We never forget, and we never really forgive. I don't. I don't turn the other cheek. No, I don't. For centuries, we've been opposed. I just want you all to know. Now, then we get to January 6th. Ashley Babbitt is a member of the mob. I want you all to understand this. If Black Lives Matter protesters protesting for social justice in this country are declared a mob by conservative commentators, then we can declare at the very minimum January 6th a mob. So she's trying to garner access illegally after illegally coming into the building. She's trying to garner access to a highly sensitive area of the Capitol. And she's trying to acquire that access by breaking glass windows to the door. So what looked like at least hundreds of people in behind her could barge through and gain access to where members duly elected were being hurried out of the room. She was given multiple commands to cease, and yet she continued and persisted. Quite simply, she did not comply. Now, why is this relevant, you all? Because the other day, I believe now, the House Speaker met with Ashley Babbitt's mother. Now, I have no problem with this meeting. The only thing I will say is this. No Republicans encouraged and told the president to reach out to Heather Hayer's mother. I don't remember that being a thing. And now they've made Ashley Babbitt political and said that there wasn't justification for what the officer did. But every member of Congress, really truly, if asked off the record, was it justified and necessary? They will tell you absolutely. They were in that room, many of them, and there were hundreds of individuals who would have jumped and breached that door had that not occurred. Believe you me, they gave Ashley Babbitt multiple warnings to cease. And conservatives always justify the state, ironically, as being legitimate. and carrying out extrajudicial murders of African Americans. Do you notice they always say if the person had just complied? But yet with Ashley Babbitt it's different. I wonder why. The world may never know, although we all do know. So we lost Ashley Babbitt is what I'm saying. And we lost Heather Heyer is what I'm saying. We had death and destruction. We'll pause.